with one of my really good friends, but more importantly, a phenomenal real estate mind. His name is Osmani. We know him as Ozzy Mondaka. He is a broker agent, so he owns his own real estate brokerage, which recently had a cool brand change. And I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell us about that before we start talking.
Hey, Brett, thanks a lot for that great introduction, man. Yeah, like you said, great friends first, man. So, thank you for that honor. But definitely somebody that I look up to and as a mentor as well. So, yeah, I've been doing real estate since 2003. I kind of launched my career on the appraisal side of the sector, and slowly I moved into the sales part. So I'm excited now to own my own brokerage for a good amount of time now. And I also do some sales, like you said, and excited. Yeah, we just did a brand relaunch. It's called Next Level Realty.
Bravo.
Thank you, thank you. So it's all about exactly that, just trying to take our clients, our agents, and just our business and raising the bar, taking it to the next level.
Very cool. So you help buyers and sellers all over Miami-Dade County, or do you focus, or maybe you're Tri-County? Where do you focus?
That's a good question. So I'm definitely licensed to practice real estate in the whole state of Florida, and I've done quite a share of real estate in the whole state of Florida as far as appraising. So I have a knowledge. I'll be able to understand real estate probably in the whole country, but licensed to do it in the state of Florida. Our firm is doing most of the sales of our market share, and it comes all the way from West Palm Beach and all the way to the West Coast, and I say all the way down to Key West. So most of South Florida is where we specialize on our business.
Awesome. Now, you were part of a franchise, and you're no longer a franchisee. You have your own company, which is your real estate brokerage. So you bring a unique perspective here as a very experienced real estate agent, but also you have experience in the franchise world. And that's some of what I wanted to ask you about today. Let's talk about some, because you do commercial as well. And so let's talk about some things that tenants should be looking for when they're about to get into a commercial lease. And just for more background, we have seen scenarios where one of our clients, now not clients at the time, but later they find us because they're kind of in a jam. They'll buy into a franchise either without advice or without good advice, and they'll pay a ton of money to get into a seemingly good franchise, but then they're on their own for their commercial space and the build out, which especially in Miami, but I'm sure a lot of places, can go horribly wrong. You can spend 3 times as much as you budgeted, and we've had to litigate for clients that spent up to $3 million on a franchise situation, and they never even got their first customer because things just went haywire. And a lot of what we see is on the build out side of things, because the franchisor is saying, you owe me the money, too bad, the space is up to you. So what are the things that tenants should be looking for and looking out for and being careful about when they're getting into a commercial lease?
You brought a lot of great points in there. And not only being involved in real estate and negotiating these leases for our clients, myself, I've had to negotiate these leases for myself as a franchise. So up to April 6th, I was part of a franchise. And we can get into the pros and cons about owning a franchise and being independent. But absolutely, Brett, you can't go into these agreements and these contracts. There's a lot of excitement in the air when you sign up for a franchise, and it's supposed to make things a lot easier. And for a lot of times they do. But they promise you a lot of support with the team that they bring forth. And a lot of that support doesn't really come in negotiating a lease.
Yeah.
And as you and I know, that's a big part of your overhead. That's a big part of your proceeds, your business that you need to get into consideration. So I say, and especially build outs, like you say. So you definitely need to find out what your margin is when negotiating a lease, and you want to stay under your margin, no matter how much you think this place is great. You need to make sure that you stick to the budget and the build out. you can negotiate these things, Brett, and there's different ways of negotiating it, right? What are some of the ways that you've seen that have gone bad for some franchisees, and I could tell you some things that maybe they can look out for.
Sure. So one scenario we saw was the inability to get more space in a commercial building put a client out of business. Again, they hired us a little bit too late, but at full capacity, max square feet utilization, this was a blow dry bar. And so if you had all the chairs full 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they still wouldn't have been profitable because of the restrictions that the franchise put on them. But if they had gotten about 50% more space, they would have. So where was the guidance on the minimum standards?
And I can see why you might have be brought into the picture on this one. It doesn't sound like they gave them those kind of guidances, and from my understanding, they need to provide those kind of guidances. You need to be able to have enough space where you're comfortably working and being profitable, but you want to give yourself room to expand. You know, especially with a franchise model, because you're getting ahead of the game and cutting a lot of shortcuts. That's what they promise you as a franchise. You want to leave room for expansion. So when you choosing a location, make sure that you talk to the landlord and find out who your neighbors are and find out how long their leases are, and when are they going to be, how long they've been there, or ask them, if I outgrow this space, will you guys honor me to maybe move off to another space within your establishment? Or some of these landlords also have a lot of other buildings, and you know, as long as you stay within their portfolio, they're really comfortable to offering you those kind of incentives. And you being a franchise, maybe an anchor store, you know, you bring value to their establishment. So you got to make sure that when you negotiate these leases, that they're bringing value to you too as well.
Right. And if you don't know to ask that ahead of time, then you don't really know that potentially the landlord has other buildings, but that's something that you need to have a good realtor with you to negotiate, up front, right?
Absolutely. You know, if you're getting into the restaurant franchise business, you know, they're going to make sure that you have real estate, restaurant background. And yeah, everyone has a little bit of real estate knowledge, but you got to let the professionals do their jobs for you, because those little things, those little questions that you may forget to ask, in the long run, they could be detrimental to your business. Just like negotiating the contract with your franchise with an experienced franchise attorney. You want to make sure that you have somebody on your team that's asking the questions that you might have forgotten to ask at that particular moment. They may not mean something at that moment, but when the time comes, they're going to mean something, and you need to have that information ahead of time.
Absolutely. So the other two areas that we see a lot is one you already mentioned, which is, let's say you have a cell phone store, for example, and you get your space, and then before you know it, 2 doors down, a competitor comes in. And you'd be surprised at how many people forget to negotiate that if you sign the lease, that the commercial building itself shouldn't be allowed to bring in a competitor.
Or exclusivity, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that, especially if you're in a business, that a cell phone store, what a great example is that, Brett. How many cell phone stores are they probably when you drive down a main highway? And you want to make sure when you open a cell phone store that you're gathering a lot of that business. Or if there's an anchor store there and your business is primarily feeding off that anchor store, you want to have exclusivity to that demographics. If they open a cell phone store on the other side of that anchor store, now you're splitting your business with somebody else. So if you're not putting exclusivity or thinking exclusivity in your lease, that's something that can really, really affect your bottom number when it comes to growth.
Absolutely. That's a big one. So of course, usually franchisees negotiate exclusivity with the franchisor and have a radius or a demographic or geographic area, I should say, but they forget with the landlord. So the third one we see is you sign a lease and you get 6 months deferred rent for a build out, or 4 or 3, whatever the negotiation is. But then the build out, things just go wrong. And in South Florida, the GC runs off with your money, or they keep making excuses about the subs and things take longer, or they come in 100% over budget. So like I mentioned earlier, the tenant's saying this is not ready, but now both the franchise and the landlord are saying, well, I gave you 6 months, it's time to pay rent.
Yeah, big deal. When we're opening a business, we definitely want to, save money where we can. And sometimes when we're negotiating these leases, we get the landlords try what looks like sometimes a sweet deal for rent abatement, right? For deferred payments. So like you said, 6 months. Wow, I could have this built with my uncle in 3 months, and you try to get the shortcut. Again, another thing that Miami is not, that has a reputation for it, to try not to pull permits and these kind of things. And you go that route, and then maybe then you get hit up with some fines, citations, or you have to take things down and pull permits, or maybe you do things the right way with a GC, like you said, and things don't go on the timeline. A lot of GCs try to spread their work around, so it's not like they got your contract and just gonna just exclusively work on your contract till it's over. They'll sign multiple contracts, and then you'll have them working on 5 projects, and they're not as quickly as inclined to finish your project as much as you want them to finish. And you're dealing with all these things on top of all the stresses of opening a new business. So,
yeah,
in my opinion, I would, as your realtor, as your broker, I would want you to weigh out those options. I would want you to say, well, what would it cost? What is the deal on the table if we allow the landlord to build it out for you? Take that whole thing off the table for you, and what are the pros and cons if you decide to take some abatement and you tackle on the building out, and those options are there, especially if you're working with reputable, responsible landlords.
Right. And that's a great point to finish with, is if you're working with reputable, responsible people and you're creating the right team around you. One of my favorite quotes is, failure is an orphan. Right. So when someone's successful, everyone says, I made an introduction for that guy, or I mentored him, or I helped. Everybody wants a piece of the action. But when somebody fails, then everyone's like, oh no, he didn't take my advice. Not me. So if you're not working with the right team, being the right lawyer, the right real estate agent, the right general contractor, then you're going to find yourself in an unfortunate situation. And we have seen an increase at Tremblay Law Firm. We're doing a lot more litigation over these commercial lease disputes and franchise disputes lately, frankly, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I love your quote, and it is very unfortunate, especially during these unfortunate times. But again, guys, if you didn't make the decision to hire an attorney ahead of time, or maybe a broker, or maybe you did, and you're in a situation where you need to get some assistance on working out something with the lease, make sure that you reach out to the professionals and make sure you get some advice, and don't tackle that on your own.
Yeah.
Brett Tremblay has been helping a bunch of our clients, and he's been able to renegotiate a bunch of leases and deferments and a bunch of things. So there is solutions out there, but make sure you're working with the right team to make sure that those solutions are in your favor.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ozzie. But to finish, hey, how do we level up, Ozzie? How do we contact you at Next Level Realty?
Thank you. So I want to level all my clients, and the way we do that is by technology. We definitely leverage technology, and especially during these times. So we share your listings nationwide, internationally, and we do all the marketing needed to get your home sold virtually. And again, with traditional marketing, visit us at www.nextlevelrealty.com, and Next Level is spelled NXTLVL.
There you go.
Realty.com.
Hold up that
Thank
shirt.
you, Brett. I really appreciate your time.
Ozzie, thank you, my man. Great chatting with you, and keep fighting the good fight, man. It's all about who you know, and me, I want to know the broker. That's Ozzie himself.
Thank you, man. Be safe. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy. Take care.
All right. Sign off.